name is Sam. I'm an engineer here on the web application team. And I've been at Box for about 2 years. So welcome, thank you all for coming out. And then here's the person you actually came here to see. This is Kate. So a little short intro. She is currently the founder of her own startup named Popcorns. But however, she's also been a developer, project manager, product manager, people manager, and most recently the VP of engineering at the side. So she is also one of the curators for the Technology Leadership newsletter, and she's also a co-founder of Recruiting House. And she also has a really awesome blog that you all should check out. It's really cool. So this is an open QA. There will be a mic up here. So there'll be a mic up here. Okay. We'll see how this goes. Give me a warning if you can't hear me. But there'll be a mic up here, so if you have any questions at any time, just come up to the mic and line up. And then I have some questions set up, but I'll take breaks and let anyone come up and ask questions. Okay. Let anyone come up and ask questions. So. Okay. I think. Okay, so let's start off with. Maybe your battery's dead. That might be. Oh, just restart. Well, first you want to give another overview or a deeper overview of your experience and interesting projects you've worked on in the past.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just give you guys a brief overview so that you know a little bit more about me and hopefully more than like what was on LinkedIn. So most recently I'd like to start my own company, and it's been something I want to do for 8 years, I think. But when I first started my career, I graduated with a degree in computer science, and I went to work as an engineer at Microsoft, where I was working on really low-level like C and assembly, and back then that was cool. I think ever was cool anyway. And then after a number of years, I went to work at Amazon, and that was, in a really kind of early time there. I remember there were only 400 people in technology, which is kind of crazy because when I left, there was several thousand, I think 4,000, and then recently I heard a number like 15,000. So they've just grown a lot in their technology organization. But back then it was just like the retail website. And that was where I really became a manager and kind of learned, it started taking on more leadership roles. And I was really bad at it, and like terrible. And so I know a lot of things not to do. But one of the things that I learned at Amazon was that, I always tell people I felt like I was running to this light at the end of the tunnel because I thought I really wanted to be an executive in a big company. But when I got promoted and I was, around a director, and I thought that would be where I wanted to be, and then I realized that that actually wasn't what I wanted, that this kind of corporate hierarchy, I really wanted more influence and involvement in strategy and business. And I read all these things online, and then I said, I really want to be an entrepreneur, but I knew nothing about startups. I'd only ever worked in these giant corporations. And so I left, and I started just freelancing for a lot of the startups in the Seattle area. I think I worked with like 9 startups. And I saw a lot of different ways of doing things, some that worked well and others that didn't. And one of the startups I was working for had hiring a CTO as part of their seed round of funding. It was a condition on getting the funds. And so they begged me to take the role because they were running out of money. And so I said, okay, but I only plan to stay a very short time because I still want to start my own company. And I ended up staying for like 3 years until the company got acquired. And it was a really interesting and very sobering experience because I was working with incredibly brilliant product people and technologists and engineers, but we couldn't build a successful business. I mean, our business was moderately successful, but we didn't have that much traction. And I think it was really down to the fact that we thought we could just figure out sales and marketing. and it's actually harder. And so one of the things when I left that job was really I needed to know the business if I'm going to do my own company. And so ultimately that's why I took my next job, which was working at a company called SEO Moz, where we build tools for internet marketing. And so I know a lot more about sales and marketing. And then just over the years, that's kind of been my focus. And so finally, I'm actually starting my own company after all these delays. So that's kind of my path, but it gives you kind of the feeling of like startups and scaling and just going through lots of acquisitions and different parts of the business, but also like a lot of corporate American experience. I also know all about that. And lots of interesting technology projects from working on like a search engine. So at SEO Moz, we crawled something like 96 billion different pages, and we were crawling something like 5 petabytes of data every week. It was crazy, and so lots of really interesting experience around scaling, and scaling really cheaply and in the cloud, which I think sort of an oxymoron at times. But and then at the side, most recently we were doing a lot of machine learning and doing some stuff there that was pretty innovative, really smart people. So lots of different experience around technology stuff. And then more recently I've been doing a lot of like front-end web programming, so I have some strong opinions there because I'm a C back-end developer writing JavaScript. It's not pretty. So that's it. That's my summary to help with your questions.
So one of the questions, but at SEO Moz, one thing that happened that you were there was you helped migrate part of the database from MySQL to NoSQL. So why did you decide to do that? What difficulties did you experience? Could you share what that was like?
So I have this belief that every software product should be built twice. Because I think the first time you build it, it's really about proving that there's a market and that people want to use it. And if you try to design to scale sometimes with the first version, you're not going to get it right because you don't really know. And I think that was the classic case of what we did with SEO Moz. We kind of built it and we used MySQL everywhere. And what we found was for certain features and functionalities, the data was growing uncontrollably. And we were using Rails and Active Record, which Active Record, at least back then, has some, and it's improved some, but it has some interesting things, ways of dealing with big data sets. So we had to do something different, and for us, moving to a NoSQL database was really more in line with the model of what we were doing. But when it comes to making those choices, I'm a big believer that you should pick the technology that makes the most sense for your use case, which really just means understanding your data. So a lot of people can make MySQL scale and work really well. Like Facebook, I think, is famous for using it just like a key value store. And they don't use a lot of joins and relations and things like that, and it makes it very powerful. And we weren't using it like that. So, and then some of the problems that we encountered when we rolled it out, I mean, it's the same thing that you encounter with anything. Like, you don't really know the problems, your velocity. We were using Cassandra at first, and we had a lot of problems with garbage collection and things not being cleaned up. But any new technology is going to have problems in production, so you just have to plan for it and be thoughtful about the migration. I mean, I can ask more specific questions if people have them, but that's my high-level thought on what we did and why we did it.
Did anyone have any more specific questions? Yeah.
Test it. Okay. Yeah, my question is, why did you choose the role of CTO and not, say, a CEO?
I wasn't qualified to be a CEO. I'm still, even though I am technically a CEO of like 3 people, I sometimes still don't feel qualified because a lot of the things that your job is to do is really about like running the business and thinking about finance and thinking about these other things or fundraising or going out and evangelizing the company. I think in the beginning it was started, the CEO is like sales. Like you're out there selling your product and selling your vision, whether it's to people you want to hire, people you want to give money, or people that customers. So I think it took me a little while to build the confidence, and I think the first startup I was at was a real sobering experience because we were really smart and we were all engineering and product people, and we thought, like, I remember we were sitting there reading like Inside or Tornado, Crossing the Chasm, which if you haven't got an MBA, they're classic kind of marketing books that you read as part of a curriculum. And we're like, oh, we can figure this stuff out, and you can't. Like, there is really good marketing and really good salespeople. And now I actually feel like I know the difference, but it took me a really long time to get there. So, but, you know, I think any job you have, no matter what level, you're kind of figuring it out as you go. Some people won't admit it, but I think that no one really knows what they're doing.
Well, speaking of people not knowing what they're doing, so say questions. Yeah. Well, what if you want to get to, you're an engineer, you want to work on large scale web applications. What are skill sets do you need? What are different processes or practices that are most effective or most important?
So I'm a big fan of like learning by doing. So I think getting experience with it. But I think the difference between large scale and small scale, which I'm kind of taking for that because I assume, I guess, people know, is that when you're working on small scale systems or working on like smaller things, you kind of can get the whole application in your head, or you can write stress tests or test for it and actually, you know, have an answer. I think when you're working with really large systems, you have thousands of servers or, you know, terabytes of data, and you're trying to do really interesting things with it, the problems that you know, arise are often things that you can't predict for, and I would even argue a lot of things that are very hard to test for. Testing is cost prohibitive. You know, you don't want your test to cost more than the development. And especially in a startup, right? Like, you can't have a test, if you have a lot of servers, you can't have a test environment that exactly mirrors production, because then it's double your costs. That just doesn't make sense. So in those cases, I think the best thing you can do is learn like the best practices. You know, fail fast, have lots of monitoring of data so you can understand it, really get operations experience, like understand what it means, like what to do if something goes wrong. You know, it's not just fix it, but there's all these sorts of best practices around taking, you know, pausing, analyzing what you're doing, creating timelines, things like that. And it's become really important in diagnosing root cause. I'm trying to think of some other stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. I always feel like, you know, a lot of times people will understand their application or their systems, but then really understanding how things get deployed, and that whole piece of the operation side is often what sets, you know, kind of large scale from small scale development apart. And it's not bad or it's not good, it's just a different experience.
So yeah, I guess kind of going into that, you mentioned testing is tricky because it can be cost prohibitive. So how do you know, or when can you say, like, this is enough testing for us, you know, or this is the best we could do? You know, I feel like it's hard at the end. A lot of people end up having a copy of production, or because they're very scared and they want to test as much as possible. So when do you know when to stop?
I think it depends on your business, right? Like, if you're running a nuclear power plant or like medical systems, like, please test a lot. Air traffic control, like these sort of things. I flew in this morning, so maybe that's one I'm always, every time I get in an airplane, I feel like it's going to crash. I don't know why. It's planned for the worst. No, but I think there are times where you do need that level of testing when bugs are really costly. And that's something I learned really early in my career at Microsoft, where everything we shipped was out, and once it was out, you couldn't fix it. And so bugs were really, really expensive. That's not the case with web. And so I think a lot of companies, you know, there's things like the feature flag or feature flipper, I've heard it called both, where you deploy but it's not actually rolled out, or where you do kind of a gradual rollout to a percentage of your customers or a percentage of your hardware fleet to kind of see how things actually work. And that can sometimes be the best way. But I mean, with testing, I would say test as much as you're comfortable, like, and how much risk you can tolerate. If it's a high-risk system, do more testing. If it's a low risk or it won't cause much of a problem, or you can just roll it out to a small set of people, or if it causes a problem, it doesn't impact your revenue, then that makes more sense. So just walking that line.
One thing you mentioned is be ready in case you fail, fail fast. What do you do when you're under a lot of pressure? How do you make decisions?
I think the most important thing is to be calm and just really focus on the facts. Like, I think a lot of times people freak out and get really emotional. Like, the one thing I learned in my career was anytime you're presented with a problem, like, no one wants to know that you're working on it. Everyone wants to, like, first they want to know proactively that you're working on it, but they want to know an ETA of when you will have an update. So I think the thing is either tell them when you'll finish or when you know. And so it's always not I'm working on it, it's I'm working on it and I'll give you an update in an hour. That was really powerful. Or like, a day or whatever, depending on how bad the crisis is. So things like that. I also think that just really being able to take a deep breath, because if other people are freaking out around you, and just kind of look at the data and get help if you need it. And I don't know, it just depends. But I always find that like people freak out, and if you're the calm person and you're like, I've got this under control and I will give you an update in an hour, that like calms everybody.
So kind of going off of that, you've also had experience seeing organization scale. So that's kind of at Box here too. We've been growing very fast. So what is some general advice you would give to companies that are growing very quickly?
So I think the most important thing is culture, and it will come out in how you hire, but also how you run your team. I think really focusing on like what's important, like what are the team's values? Is it quality? Is it speed? Is it collaboration? Is it sharing knowledge? Like what are the things that are really important to you, and hire for those? But also make sure that in the work that you're doing together, that those values are reinforced in your process, in your vocabulary. And then I think the other thing is that information is flowing, because when you're 6 people, it's really easy for everyone to like kind of know what's going on. But then when you scale to 15, all of a sudden you have to have all these more meetings and all this bureaucracy. And so it's a fine line not to get too much bureaucracy, and so to figure out what information do people need and how can you make those conduits as efficient as possible.
Yeah, kind of going into that, how do you balance the need to know versus having too many people in meetings, for example? It's kind of like you want to let everyone in the company know what's going on, but at the same time you want to stay productive. So how do you keep that balance?
I think it depends on the person. I even say that more than I think the team. I was reading, gosh, I wish I could remember what company it was recently. I want to think it was Stripe, but I might be wrong, maybe Square or something. But they have this thing where they CC everyone on the emails or whatever, they just kind of include everyone. And then people can either filter it if they don't care or read it if they want to. And I thought that was a really genius idea. It will process a lot of email quickly, because then people can kind of absorb it if they want. But I think that it is a fine balance to walk. But I also would encourage people not to assume that information is not important, because I had this lesson really early in my career where I was getting these updates that I thought were not really that interesting. And then I was telling the teammate, he's like, well, what do you guys actually do in that staff meeting? And I told him, he's like, well, how come you don't tell us that? And it was about like our customer kind of composition and the different verticals our sales team was focused on. I was like, that's not really interesting. This guy was so interested. He wants to know everything about it. And I realized that I made a really bad assumption that I deemed this information not important because it wasn't important to me. And so I think that's also really important to just understand about those biases or those blindness, and then try to really get what is important to the people on your team and the people around you, and figure out efficient ways of sharing that information, whether it's all hands meetings or email or like in the intranet or what have you. But I also think then making it really clear what people are responsible for is the other key piece of that, because if people have clear defined roles and clear defined areas, and it helps understand what roles and what places need more information than others. So that can help too, it's just really clear delineation.
Well, actually, I'm going to take a break. Does anyone have? And of course, feel free to come up at any time if you have any questions.
Hello. I was just wondering what you do to keep up to speed, stay up to date on tech trends.
On tech trends?
Well, not just the pop culture of it, but how do you figure out what you want to read or what you want to know, and that how you can learn about things that would impact the way you design your business?
I have this newsletter that I mentioned this. No, no, I do have a newsletter, but I read a lot. Like, I think where most people watch TV for fun, I actually surf on the internet. This one time, I started looking up something on Stack Overflow, and 4 hours later, I was looking at the FAA regulations, and I really had no clue how I got there or how the time passed. So, the internet is very dangerous in that way. But I do read a lot, so I subscribe to a lot of newsletters, other newsletters, or like I get like the Tech Crunch every day in my email box, and I scan the headlines. I wrote this script that follows. Like I have like 10 people on Twitter that I think share really good stuff, and it actually it's more than 10, it's probably like 50, and it's like a list, and it pulls all the articles they have in common and puts it in my inbox in a week, because they often have a lot of overlap, and that can kind of help. And then I really like Prismatic, which if you haven't used it, it's an app, and they do a really good job based on if you hook it up to your social networks, like what people you're connected to are sharing, and then based on what you read, I think it reinforces the algorithm. And I like it because it's a cool application of machine learning. I kind of have a crush on that company. Actually, I think that I just love the product. So that's one way, but I do read a lot. I probably put in an hour of reading on the internet around stuff related to my job, but it's fun for me, so it doesn't feel like work. So, and I read everything from like design, leadership, like Harvard Business Review, to like, I love the high scalability blog. So it's just everywhere, all over the place. So I don't know if that answers your question,
but. You mentioned that you think you should build every product twice. So how do you determine when you're going to rebuild it and when you're going to stop just like making hacks on top of it? And to follow up, how do you make sure that when you rebuild it, you don't like pull a frontster and totally like ruin your product?
Great point. So the first part is that I think, so when we were doing this in other companies I worked at with features and things like that, we always planned it up front. So it wasn't ever like, here, the system is broken, now we need to redo it. So we kind of built it with that in mind. So we took shortcuts. We didn't necessarily write a ton of tests. We didn't necessarily do that, and we might only release it to like a beta group of people, and then we would plan to rewrite it when we actually had their uses. So like that was one thing. We did a lot of SEO mocks, and the actual reason that we started doing it was because of people. So I have this belief that there are V1 developers and there are V2 developers, and they keep working together. And it's not one thing against one or the other, it's just that some people really like building things quickly and seeing the results and getting it out there. And I call those the V1 people. And then there's the V2 people who love writing tests and have it be scalable and have it meet all these requirements. But if you put them working on the same project, and this is what happened, I'd have one person in my office complaining that the other person was taking too long and writing tests they didn't need, and then the other person complaining that they had to write tests for the other person's code because they weren't doing it, and it was this horrible situation. But they were both super smart and both super good. They're just good at different things. And not all projects, I guess, make sense, but if you can allow yourself the luxury of doing this, I think it's a great way to test customer validation. It's a great way to know how your data is going to grow, because no matter how hard you try, oftentimes it's very hard to model how people will actually use your system. And so being able to do it in this way, it's almost like kind of lean startup applied to development. But it also allows you to kind of prototype and get ideas better, and so it can help you build better UIs and things like that. So, but as for when you make the decision and do those sort of things, I think just kind of planning around it. Like, I know the product I'm building now and going to launch won't be the same product we probably have a year or two from now. God, I hope that like people are going to write it way better. But I think it takes a lot of, you have to feel good, because basically it means that all the code you're writing is going to be thrown away. And so when you have a sense of ownership or pride, or you've only written that code in your career, it can be very like demoralizing to be like, all my code, my whole career is gone. I've experienced this very early in my career when people rewrote it's like all the code I put in better. You know, it happens. But I would say that if you kind of plan for it and you celebrate the journey and not just like the finished products and things like that, it can be a really great way of just kind of building and constantly making your systems better.
I had more of a career question for you, I guess.
A what?
So you said that you had kind of worn a lot of different hats, had a lot of different jobs, and you thought you wanted to be a CEO anyway. And I was wondering, were you working towards that for your whole career, for your different jobs? Was that like a planned progression, or you
Oh my gosh, no.
discovered along the way?
Okay, so early in my career, I hated managers. And I wanted to be a technical architect. And if you'd asked me about managers, I would have told you how horrible they are. So it's very ironic that this is what I do. I still don't really like meetings, but I would say that in the last, since I decided I wanted to work in a startup, I don't think I knew I wanted to be a CEO. I knew I wanted to found a company. I think that maybe it's like an ego trip, but I think I could do better than a lot of the people I work for, so that's why I want to be a CEO now. But that's it. Yeah, I come on stage, I can say whatever I want. But I always wanted to be like a senior technologist. I wanted to be a scientist. I went to a school that, as an undergrad, you got to do research, and I loved doing that part. I always thought I would stay really close to the technology, and over the years, as I focused more on trying to grow my business skills so I could be a CEO, I had to move away from the technology because you can't get good at both at the same time, right? Or you have to pick and choose what you're focused on. So early in my career, I focused on going deep. I wanted to be as technical as possible. And then when I got promoted to a manager and I wasn't good at it, I was like, I'm going to be good at this because I've never failed at anything in my life. And so I read like every management book that I could. And I'm not a fast reader, so this was like every weekend. And I think I care a lot. And so, I just focused on it. And then I want to be a good CEO, so I'm like, I need to learn finance, I need to learn sales, I need to learn marketing. I can talk to everyone about everything they should do to market their products because I've been reading about it nonstop, right? So I think it's just being deliberate more now, but it definitely wasn't a straight path. It was more of like a winding road.
Hi, Kate. My name is Viola. I'm actually a big fan of your blog.
Oh, thank you.
So it's great to see you here. And I recommend everyone to check it out. It's a really great blog. So I was wondering actually, what surprised you the most when you just started the company, like in this few recent months?
What surprised me the most?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, gosh. I forgot how much I liked coding. So I've been managing people for 7 years or something. And initially when I first became a manager, I used to write code, and then it really bit me in the ass. So I tried to let the team be an expert in that and focus on these other areas. And I hadn't really written code for a whole day, except on the weekends, tinkering. But even then, it was only 3 or 4 hours at a time. And then I literally quit my job, and it's I remember on Saturday, this is my first day of my startup. I sat down to write code, and I wrote code the whole day, and at the end of the day, it was this is why I studied computer science. I had forgot. Because the reason, it was fun in school. I loved chemistry, and I loved physics, and I loved all these classes, but it was the CS classes were it's you're going to do puzzles all day, and that was homework, and so. But I kind of forgot that. So I was really surprised at how much I forgot, how much I loved what I did, and why I did it in the first place. But then again, as soon as I have gone more into CEO mode, once the product was kind of built, now I'm back in my comfort zone again. So it's just kind of weird, I think. It's been I'm surprised at my own emotional up and downs around the whole thing. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question. You mentioned a couple of times that you didn't think you were very good at management when you first started. So,
I know I wasn't.
how did you know? Did somebody tell you? Was it in your performance review? How did you make that decision, and how did you go about fixing the problems that you identified?
No, I actually still got really good performance reviews, and then maybe that's a question if I should have or not. But I think that I always talk about how I was optimizing for the wrong variables. It took me a long time to really feel comfortable enough with myself that I didn't need praise. I think that in school, and even as an individual contributor, you're really working for yourself, your grades, your accomplishments, your review score. And as a manager, you can't do that. Like you're in service to your team. You're like the janitor if you need to be the janitor. And like I had to clean up after people lots of times. But I think I saw it as like, oh, I have all this authority and now I can get stuff done. And I was just really deluded. But the kicker always comes down to me was I thought the more people I had working for me, the more important I was. And I was convinced that if I had a big enough team that I would get invited to these meetings where they were making these really strategic decisions. And I had a big team. I had like 40 people. And I remember this meeting, and everyone wanted this one guy, and his name was Al. And everyone's like, Al has to be in this meeting. And I was like, why does Al have to be here? And then it dawned on me, Al had no direct reports. He was an individual contributor. He was a senior engineer. And it was the first time I really understood influence. And it was a very sobering experience for me because I always thought the more people that you had or what your title was really mattered. Like it's kind of a classic, I think, thing that happens to people. But then I realized like the fact that everyone wanted this guy in this meeting where he had no direct reports. He was working for some random manager somewhere, but everyone cared what he had to say. And I wanted to be the person that people wanted in the meeting. I didn't want to be the person that was there just because I was like the de facto person. Like I wanted to be wanted. And I think that was a really good experience for me because now I see it a lot in new managers. I see it a lot in people who want that promotion and that ambition, like they're seeking that sort of thing that you get in school, that recognition. And so I'm always able to help tell people like, no, that's not what you want. You don't want power, you want influence. You want people to want you there. You want to be respected. You don't want to be respected because somebody promoted you and everyone thinks you're promoted above your level. That's not good. So, I don't know, those are some examples. Like, but I don't think at the time I realized that was terrible. I mean, I sort of did, but I think it was I thought it was just a lot of experience and just getting, like learning and seeing other people and making mistakes and getting better at it. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jeff, and thanks for coming to speak with us.
Hi, Jeff. Nice to meet you.
We mentioned before how culture is really important. And what do you think worked and didn't work about the culture at Microsoft or Amazon or SEO Moz? And obviously, every company has its own culture, and it's not whether culture is good or bad, it's whether it fits for what the company is. So I want to hear what your perspective of those or any other of the startups that you worked at.
Yeah, so I love that everyone got their own office at Microsoft because I can't work in open space on like focused work. I still can't. That was why we had really good work from home policies in every team I've been on. But I think that's my own deficiency. But at Microsoft, they had a really good process and they were really rigorous about it, but you had no influence. The customers were never a factor. You didn't talk about the customers, you didn't know how people used your stuff, because you shipped it and it was gone, and you're working on the next thing. And someone else talked to the customers and then it fed down to you. And so that was something like I thought was really broken. So at Amazon it was like the opposite, where everything we did was about customers and about metrics and data. And like if a feature went out, it didn't matter if people spent a year on it, if it didn't actually help submit, like with the goal of selling more books or increasing engagement or whatever, it just got rolled back. And I saw people who literally like a year of their work was just like, no, we're not launching this. So it was very different in that way. It was also a much more aggressive culture. A lot of people who work there say they hate it, but I actually loved it, and I have a lot of friends still there, but I think I fit with that culture of like running 100 miles an hour, kind of aggressive culture, and so, I don't know, that was different, but other people don't like it. They also, the developers do all the operations, so you learn a lot about operational excellence, which was good for me, but I know it's also sucks to get paged in the middle of the night like 10 times where you don't get any sleep, and then you're expected to do your work the next day. At SEO Moz, I actually like their culture the best, but there's like one really fatal flaw with it, which is, so they have these company values called tag fee, which I love, and you can Google it if you don't know, but it's they're really transparent. It's a company that is more focused on the employees and the people than I've ever seen anywhere, where they will do the right thing for the person at the detriment to the company. But I think the other problem with it is that people are a little bit too nice sometimes, and so it can take a lot, there's a lot of inefficiencies that I think can hurt a startup around trying to build consensus, or for the people who are used to moving fast, where that can be really hard. But I definitely prefer that culture over everywhere else that I've worked. So that's kind of my opinions. But I think ultimately your culture is defined by who you have and what you're trying to do, right? Like, if you're shipping software and it's going somewhere, you need more process, you need more rigor. Like, those things make sense. And so I don't think anyone's bad or good. I just think we're all different, and it really is about like what you're trying to achieve. So.
One of the things you write about in your blog is that relationships are important for your career. So I'm wondering, how have relationships helped shape your career, and what advice would you give to people who are hoping to foster these relationships?
That's a great question, and one that I think I've had a lot of revelations the last couple of years about, like, relations and networking. In fact, I was just talking with Nicholas earlier about how my startup is easier because I have a good network, which I think is kind of funny, but that's a whole different topic. So when I was at Amazon, I ran part of like the middleware, which touched a lot of teams. So I accidentally got a network. I didn't mean to, but because when everything broke, it was like people were dependent on me, so I was on the hook to talk with my team or to represent my team. And it actually built a really big network of people that I did a lot of interviewing while I was there. But those people have turned out to be like the most beneficial relationships I have now. So like this is like 8, 9 years ago, and so I think it's really important to be extra nice to all the people you're working with now, especially like the really smart ones that are going to go do something amazing, because those are the people that in 10 years are going to be somewhere amazing and that you might want to talk to. And it's just kind of, I think I've just realized this more recently. But I also think that, in general, the only way to get anything done is through people. Like, especially if you're in a leadership role, but even as like a CEO of a company, to sell things, to build things. And it really comes down to relationships and influence and being able to, but people don't want to be manipulated, right? So how do you add value to them? How do you understand what they want? So that you can give them that. And then that way, once you kind of get that, then you can help them and help them be successful. And I really am a big believer that if you optimize for not like 1 year or 2 year, but like 10 year, then that will help. So like you have to think about it like, oh, I'm taking a hit now, but in 10 years that person will remember this. And to this day, well, I think about it as, so there was like a tech talk, like this is a story that people tell about me, so I'm kind of repeating it, but it's one of those things where at the time I didn't think of it. So I was managing a small team, and there was this talk, and only 2 people could go. And I had saved one of the tickets for myself, because I wanted to go. And then one of the guys was like, oh, I didn't know about it, can I go? And there was only 2 tickets. And I said, well, you can have mine, and you can go. And it was in front of this big group of people. And everybody was like, whoa, what kind of manager would give up their ticket to this, like, to meet this person for someone else? And it was this, but to me it was, by doing that. And then like when pitching conferences, like I'll never pitch something to someone on my team is pitching it because because I'm a more experienced speaker, I don't want them not to have the chance, because a lot of the time conference organizers don't want to talks from the same company, for example. And so I just think, optimizing for the long term and like helping them for that, even though at the short term it'd be like, oh, I'm not speaking, it adds up. And so I just kept thinking of changing the way you think about relationships. But then it pays dividends. People are like, oh, you totally want to work for Kate because she'll give up her ticket for you.
So kind of going along with that of fostering relationships in the workplace, so how do you do better at your job without stepping on other people's toes?
Help other people do their jobs better. I think you need to always do your best work, but my biggest piece of advice is like, there's 2 pieces of advice. So the first one is, and I told you this earlier, is that you're the average, and this is some famous speaker that I don't remember the name, but I'm really bad at names. that says you're the average of your 5 closest friends. And I think that's really true. And so I would say, like, if you think about the people at work that you're hanging out with, are they the best people at the company, or are they like the people sitting around complaining about management or someone else? Because I think that could be an interesting revelation about your role. The second part I would say is that the person, like the really smart person that you don't mesh with, you can fix it. And the best thing you can do is spend time with someone, because if someone is being a pain, chances are there's some underlying motivation or emotion that is driving them to do that. And so if you can understand that, and you spend time with them and they realize that your intentions are to help them and to work with them, you'd be amazed that you can be like friends with people. And I have a personal story about this, where when I first started working at a company, I just remember I spent all this effort organizing this offsite. And these 2 people, I got talking to the team and they made these snarky comments. And it was so just like, it was like one of the times that I was so in tears, because I had to make this big case to the CEO to get the budget to do this offsite, and they were totally not into it, and like basically making snarky comments and devaluing all this work I had done. And so I was like, you know what, I've got to fix this. So I went home that night and I was really upset. But then the next day I went in and I like the main guy who I thought was causing all the problems, I was like, hey, can you come work on this project with me? And it was like this process thing. And then I started working with him every day. When I left that company, to this day, he, I think, misses me more than anyone else. Like, he still sends me notes, right? Like, and so, he didn't know it, but I was going to be his best friend. And I think that you can do that with any relationship. It's just, people act that way out of fear. Like, he was afraid of a new boss. Like, he probably had a bad boss, right? And when he realized that I wasn't going to do whatever he thought I was going to do, then he actually wanted help. And then, I mean, never had an offset again. I think I was too pissed about the first one. But he was a lot more helpful in like any sort of team function and things like that.
Wanted to give everyone come up. More people are afraid to come up.
Hi, so what kind of strength and weakness do you think your technical background brought to your management roles? What do you got?
The strength and weaknesses. So I would say that I think that I'm really good at debugging things, that to this day, like when people can't figure things out, I'm still like the person that gets escalated to, so I think that's always is good. Well, not now, because there's no one else to escalate to in my company, but that's until January. I also think that I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of things go wrong. And so when we are doing design or architecture, I felt like I got really good over the years at asking questions just to help people think about what could go wrong. So it wasn't necessarily changing the approach or whatever, because I kind of feel like people have to own that. But it was learning what questions to ask, like, oh, have you thought about what would happen here? Or, you know, different things like that. So just being able to really get good at questions. But a lot of that came from seeing things break a lot. Because you have to kind of preemptively think about what fails. I think that being able to speak about the technology to executives, to customers, to potential employees is really important. So I don't think you can be a technical leader. I mean, maybe some people can. I don't know if I could without really understanding that. So where if someone asked me to draw on the whiteboard how our systems fit together, like I need to be able to understand that, because I need to understand the impact of projects. I need to understand the impact of resources, who I hire, what they do. So I think the technical background is really, really important for managing engineering and software. Plus, I think there's also something to be said when someone gives you something that makes no sense, to be like, okay, that makes absolutely no sense. Why is that estimate so high? And like sometimes you'll just realize, oh, there's shit I didn't know. But other times you'll help them realize that maybe they're over-engineering something, whereas something simple might have done better. So I think there's a lot of value in that. I wouldn't want to work for a non-technical manager if I was doing technical work personally, but mostly because I want someone who can represent what I'm doing and who understands the value and can understand good code versus bad code. And if you've never written good code and bad code, like how do you know? And so I guess that's part of it, but I don't know, at some level you work for a non-technical manager, so maybe it's when your job becomes less technical, and like being the CTO, your manager is the CEO and they're not always technical. I don't know, maybe that answers your question.
I'm an engineer, and one of my perhaps bad habits is I never really feel I understand something unless I've attempted to build it at least once. But in any company, be it a startup or a large one, your technical resources are constrained. How do you balance making versus buying and reusing?
That's a really good question. And I think that again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If it's something core to your competency that you're going to be doing over and over and over again, or running and maintaining, I think it's worth really understanding it because you're on the hook for it. If it's something that, like an internal intranet or like email system or source control, like outsource it. There are people that are doing it way better, and it's probably cheaper in the long run than maintaining those systems yourself. And so I think just making that trade-off around the business risk and also your interest and your time. Like for example, I've been writing a lot of JavaScript, and then really, I think I'm gonna stop doing it and hire someone else to do it because I just don't really want to learn it anymore. I know enough. No offense to people doing JavaScript, like I'm just a back-end person and I like working on things that I'm fast and efficient at. But I also have this theory, and I was telling Sam this earlier, that to find the things that when you wake up in the morning and you're excited to do, and not just that you're excited, but that you're good at. And I think if you can find those tasks, whatever they are, that then you're going to be the happiest and you're going to be the most successful and you're going to get promoted. Or whatever it is that you probably want to do that happens. Maybe you'll build something amazing. But I think that understanding that you have a superpower, like you may not know what it is just yet, but like you have it, and it's probably the thing that you're like doing, which, I mean, if you're watching TV a lot and you like doing that, well, that's not, I think you have to have something that both is intrinsically and extrinsically motivating, which means that you're proud of it too. And so most people aren't proud that they watch TV. But some people are proud that the video games maybe it's that. But I think understanding what your superpower is and then honing that and making it better and making it even more super. And then once you do that, then I think you will be a lot more successful.
Thank you.
Throughout your job, throughout your career, when you kind of made decisions to change jobs or start new projects, what's some of the decision criteria you had, or like how did you decide and finally go for like the next new thing?
Oh my gosh, for everyone it was really different. But one of the things I always did was I tried to pick the role where I would learn the most, where I've always had 3 requirements like for any job. One is that that I would really learn and be pushed out of my comfort zone. And so like when I joined Amazon, like I'd never done web, and when I joined, and I'd never done like Perl, which is what I was writing on my plugin. And when I joined, and then later Java, when I joined the startup, I'd never done startup, and I'd never done video, and I'd never done search, and I did all those things. And then at SMOS, I'd never done, that was like when cloud was new, and I got to use my search background to build something really big with this web index, and I'd never done anything with Rails and Ruby, and so I did that there. And just every place was really, really different. But it was also very strategic. Like I'm like, at SMOS, I really need to learn marketing, so I'm gonna go there and then decide. I went there because I'd never worked on a consumer product. The first startup, we started as a consumer product and pivoted to B2B. And I thought, well, I'd love to learn about consumer stuff, and I want to do more with R&D and machine learning, and I had never worked with that in production. But I did like my master's thesis on it, machine learning stuff, so I was just passionate about it. So I think it just depends, but one thing is that I knew that I wanted to do this, and I knew I wanted to work with really smart people, so I feel like every company I worked at, like everybody was super smart and really talented. And I feel like the other piece of it was that I really wanted to work on interesting problems. So I kind of focused on that. But also, just, I think I could have been more deliberate and I could have stayed places longer, but I always was recruited out, and I get attracted to shiny objects. I think it's like my ADD sort of thing. So like, if you talk about my startup, I'm not building one product, we're building 4, which is kind of classic for me. But yeah, I like doing a lot of different stuff, so I think that's partially why. But every place I always went, I'm like, I'm gonna stay 3 months. And they're like, yeah, that's cool. We just need your help with this thing. And I'm like, okay, and then like 2 years go by. I'm like, damn, I need to go start my startup. Okay, I'll stay 3 months. Literally every company.
So you you've also been on the opposite side of recruiting, where I think you said at Amazon you've interviewed over 500 people, and you also co-founded Recruiting Hacks. So what do you look for when hiring, and sort of on the other side, and what could you do to make yourself an appealing candidate?
That's tough. Okay, so like I think on resumes you look for kind of specific things. Like I don't know, there's a blog post on that, but I think that ultimately I'm looking for someone who likes to learn and likes to grow and is just really driven. I would take that and like attitude, like good attitude over pretty much anything else. I mean, as long as they're reasonably competent, have some good experience, like track record. I think the other thing that I focus on a lot, or what I would say to people to make themselves more appealing, is that I don't think resumes are going to go away. I think LinkedIn, you're already seeing take the place of it. But I also think that before, designers were the only ones with portfolios. And I feel like now, as an engineer with GitHub and open source and all these things, you can have a portfolio. I have a portfolio. It's my blog. It's what I tweet on Twitter. Yeah, so sometimes I always say twit on Twitter, and it sounds really funny, so make sure I said it right. But I haven't had to do a resume in forever because people don't look at that. They look at, you know, what is this person doing? What have they done? Who have they worked with? And I think that I was talking with Sam, who works here in engineering, and we were talking about how good people never actually look for jobs. Like they're always employed and doing something great. And so the biggest piece of advice to people would be, you know, make sure that you're doing something great and build up your portfolio. And if you don't have a blog, like have a blog. Because my blog had 100 visitors, like at most, and I'm pretty sure they were all people I knew for a good number of years until 2011, and now it gets over in like a year and a half. Now it gets over 30,000 visits a month. Like it's crazy, but like it could happen to you too. But for a long time I wrote and no one was reading it except maybe my family. Or people like random people who like I don't know. So that's my. I think people should have a blog. I think people should think about what their online portfolio will be, and it doesn't have to be good. Like God, I don't even want to go back and read my posts because I know like a lot of them are. Like I read them and I'm like, God, it's so wrong. Like, I can't believe it's out there. But I kind of keep it there for like posterity's sake because it's like an evolution and it's a journey. And I think it's kind of fun to go back and read your journey. I don't read mine, just like I don't watch myself on video, but I think that, you know, you got to start somewhere. And, you know, why wait?
Well, I have one last question for you. So if does anyone else who has questions, make sure to line up to have your chats. But it goes back to the company you're founding now, which is Popcorns. And you're basically creating tools to help employees easily communicate to their managers. So why did you decide to build this kind of tool? What experience did you have that made you realize this is something that people need?
So I like writing scripts for things, and so I used to write scripts to make my life better as a manager. And I started with like these one-on-one questions and all these different things because I wanted to be as efficient as possible, and I wanted to be good. When people walked into my office, I wanted to be a good manager. What I found is like when you're managing an 18-person team, because I like flat organizations where people can kind of lead as individuals, it was really hard to keep track of what everyone was doing. And so I think that more and more people are moving this direction, and leadership is no longer monopolized to like a select number of people. And I think leadership is now everyone working together. And there's this infographic I saw recently that was this guy who's like standing, it looks like on a chariot, and he has these three guys like pulling the chariot, and he's pointing instruction, and it says, this is what leadership, people think leadership is. And this is what leadership actually is. It's like there's these four people running together, and you can't tell who's the leader. And I think that's how I think about leadership. So what I'm building is software to make that easier for people. So software that is more about like goal tracking and soliciting peer feedback in a way that is like divorced and from performance reviews, because it's really hard to get feedback when you know it's going to count towards someone's raise or on 6 months of their work. Like, what are you going to say? But if someone asks you like peer feedback and just to be pedantic on like a line of code, it's very easy to give them like useful feedback. And so the trick is to find that happy medium where you can get feedback at like Twitter link from people that's actually meaningful and useful. And so we're kind of building some software to make that easier for people. So that's like the mission. Any other questions? Yes? Although you shouldn't get to ask me a question.
I'm not sure to what extent this has been covered already, but how do I sign up for your weekly tech leadership news email?
If you go to www.techleadershipnews.com, you can sign up. Thank you, Ian. Sorry. No, I didn't think it was going to do that.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Kate. I think you'll be sticking around a little bit in case any of you are too shy to come up for questions. But let's give her a round of applause.